everyone, how's it going? I'm coming to y'all with yet another guitar review. This time we're looking at the AMI JM-SGE. This will also be known as the Sigma JM-SGE if you live anywhere outside of the USA. We're going to briefly talk about that in this video. But first, I want to go ahead and give a disclaimer. If you are a shut up and play kind of guy, this video is not going to be for you. This is not an acoustic guitar demonstration video, though I will be demonstrating the tone of the guitar acoustically in the video. This is a review, so if you're looking for just a pure tone demonstration, I do have one of those on my channel already. As far as testing the electronics, I will link in the description where you can hear how the guitar sounds plugged in, as I do not feel like doing a lot of video editing to these review videos in order to insert it. What I'm going to do here is show the guitar, talk about the specs, tell you what I think about it, tell you about that, how it sits competitively, who it's for, so on and so forth. So let's go ahead and jump into this. Now, AMI, if you don't know, is a company that is stationed out of Germany. I think it's Munich, Germany. Yep, sure is. And they have their guitars manufactured over in China. Okay, so these are Chinese-made guitars. I screwed that up, but these are Chinese-made instruments. So if you have a problem with guitars that are made in China, you may want to click away from this video immediately. However, for those of you who realize that quality can come from any country in the world, be it China, Taiwan, Japan, Korea, Mexico, it doesn't matter, definitely stick around because there is a lot to say about this guitar. And spoiler alert, it is a very good budget acoustic electric guitar. It has some problems, but overall, I would recommend it to the majority of people who I feel it is suited for. So if you live in the US, you're going to see these guitars branded AMI, versus pretty much everywhere else in the world, the guitars are branded Sigma. Now, Sigma used to be a subsidiary of Martin guitars, and they sort of acted like Squier to Fender, or Epiphone to Gibson, or Oscar Schmidt to Washburn, so on and so forth. They were Martin's budget line. However, they ended up discontinuing the line of guitars, and they sold the names. Now, the thing is, from everything I've gathered, and people I've talked to who know far more than me, AMI actually bought the remnants of the original Sigma guitar factory, like guitar brand. Meaning they got the rights, they got the designs that the old Sigma had, they got access to the logo that Sigma used to use, so on and so forth. So in a lot of ways, AMI Sigma can be considered the true successor to Martin's Sigma. So why don't you see AMI guitars branded as Sigma in the United States? Well, it's very simple. There's a company, I believe it's St. Louis Music, who, better known as Alvarez, for most of us across the world, they bought the rights to the Sigma name here in the USA. So even though those are not actually truly copying Martin guitars, like they kind of are, but they don't have the same internal bracing and whatnot, they aren't 100% built the same way. In America, they have the rights to the name Sigma, so AMI couldn't sell their guitars as Sigma here, despite being more true to what Sigma always has been than St. Louis's version of it is. So that's just to clear up a bit of confusion. If you live in the USA and you see Sigma branded guitars being sold in your music stores, if it has kind of a generic font logo on the headstock, you are to be looking at a St. Louis or Alvarez Sigma. And those are fine guitars, by the way. They aren't bad. But it's different than we're looking at here. So just kind of wanted to get that out of the way. Again, in America, AMI JM-SGE. Everywhere else, Sigma JM-SGE. I don't know why they changed the name at the end there. I guess A for AMI and S for Sigma. So I have my notes over here as always, and my notebook is falling to pieces. But I have my notes so I don't forget anything in this review. But I want to go ahead and start by talking about the general rundown. We have a solid Sitka spruce top. Okay, and it has this, to me this is a satin finish, but according to the website, this is an ultra thin UV finish. So yeah, satin finish top in this beautiful sunburst. Laminate mahogany back and sides. A mahogany neck. A Micarta fingerboard and bridge. And there's a lot of people out there who hate Micarta, and that's fine. But I do want to quickly say that you've probably used a Micarta fingerboard and bridge guitar and don't even realize it because they call it Richlite. Richlite is just a brand of paper Micarta. What is Micarta? Simply put, it's a synthetic that has been used in several other industries for a long time. Me specifically, I come from the knife reviewing scene, where I've been a member for about 14 years. Micarta has always been a very popular handle material for both folding and fixed blade knives. What it essentially is you get several stacks and layers of different materials. It could be paper or duct canvas, or I've seen people use cigar boxes. I've even seen people use computer chips at one point. And you kind of layer them with epoxy resin, and you compress them under very, very, very high tension until it becomes a much smaller piece of material. And what that results in is a damn durable material. Micarta is incredibly hard to break, and it's weather resistant. It's honestly just a great material overall in that sense. For use on a fingerboard and bridge, I don't see a problem with it because your fingerboard and bridge really aren't having a big impact on your acoustic guitar's tone. I'd say it's anywhere between 0 to 2%, maybe, if that. But there are a lot of upsides to Micarta for a fingerboard and bridge, especially for a fingerboard. That is, unlike a porous wood, like rosewood, Micarta's not going to soak up a bunch of your sweat and gunk and crap from your fingers when you're playing. And as a result of it not soaking that up, it's easy to just wipe right off. And that means it's not going to be pushing it back into your strings, deadening your strings while you're playing if you play with uncoated strings. Okay, so if you played a Martin guitar with a Richlight fingerboard, Richlight is a brand of paper Micarta. So you've used Micarta before. It's no different than what you're looking at here. And again, we had that on the fingerboard and on the bridge. We also have some mother of pearl dot inlay along the fingerboard. And we do have our dot inlay along the side. Okay. We have AMI branded chrome die-cast tuning machines. And I tried getting AMI to answer who made their tuning machines, and they were not very forthcoming. I asked if it was Ping or if it was Jin-Ho, as those are the two that primarily make tuning machines for these different companies, and they refused to comment. All they said is they were made by a manufacturer over in China. That's all they had to say about it. So, you know, you're looking at another Ping. I think Jin-Ho is Korean, but I think they have some tuners made in China. You're looking at one of those companies. What I can tell you about the tuning machines is they function well enough. The guitar holds tune decently. Not amazingly, not poorly. It's average. You could upgrade them for sure if you wanted to get something better on here. You know, Grovers would be a great budget upgrade. The $35 Gotos would be a huge upgrade. You could probably get more tuning stability out of a set of Wilkinsons. So those are another budget option you could use to replace these if you felt the need to. I don't think they're, you know, so bad they need replacing, but maybe I'll do so just so I can test out different tuner brands in the future. Plastic bridge pins, bone, nut, and saddle. And by the way, the nut width on this is 1 11/16, and that is very interesting because it feels wider than that. But I've measured it myself. It is indeed 1 11/16, but it feels closer to a 1 3/4 inch neck for some reason in my hand. It just feels a bit wider, even though it isn't. And it's not because the neck is super fat either. Like you can see, we have a fairly average acoustic guitar neck on here, so I'm not really sure why I get that feeling from it. Let's see, what else do I have to say? Did I miss anything? Scale length, 24.75 inch scale, so it is a shorter scale. And if you couldn't tell by looking at this, this is indeed a copy of a Gibson J-45, albeit in a satin finish rather than a high gloss finish. Now, unlike many guitars out there that are copying, this did take some differences in the design. You know, we obviously have a slightly different headstock. It's still very Gibson-esque, but it's not quite the same. Different bridge entirely. This is a Martin-style bridge, which makes sense. AMI is known for their Martin-style copies. Different finish on the guitar entirely. It's not a one-to-one copy of a Gibson J-45, but it is very clearly taking 90% of its design cues from that, you know, famous workhorse guitar. And that isn't a bad thing. Does this sound like a Gibson J-45? Simply put, no. It doesn't. It has a completely different kind of sound, and that's because the bracing in here is beefy. Like, this has some really thick... Let's see if I can bring this up here to show you. It may be kind of hard to tell on camera. Maybe you can see that, but the spruce bracing we have inside of this guitar is thick. And so we end up getting a very different tone. If you don't know, your bracing is one of the biggest factors in how your acoustic guitar is going to sound. Arguably, even more so than the woods themselves. As crazy as that is, it really does make a huge difference what kind of bracing you have in your guitar, how thick the bracing is. And if you don't believe me, go watch any of the videos where someone takes an old Harmony or K guitar and they remove the old ladder bracing and they put in X bracing and see the massive difference it makes to the tone of the guitar. If you close your eyes, you would swear they were not even the same guitar. It really is that vital. So because this has thicker, beefier bracing than the Gibson J-45, it ends up giving off a completely different tone. Is it better? Is it worse? In my opinion, the Gibson does sound better, as to be expected. But the sounds are different enough that I can't even in all good consciousness call this a good proxy for a Gibson J-45 just because they are so separate from each other. So despite looking like a J-45, it doesn't really sound like a J-45. It has a sound more its own, which is not a bad thing. Electronics, we're looking at, so they just branded the Preamp AMI, but I knew I'd seen this Preamp before, so I looked it up. This is a CE304T preamp system and Undersaddle Piezo. So as far as the electronics go, they're fine. I'd call them kind of average piezo electronics. They don't sound nearly as good as things like the Fishman systems, but they sound leagues better than your generic unbranded Chinese preamp and pickup systems. Okay, we have treble, middle, bass, a tuner, and a volume control. That's all you get. As far as how it sounds fine. Again, check the description for a link to the electronics demonstration. I will say the tuner isn't great, at least not on the one that I have here. It will get your guitar close, but whenever I tune with this, and then I use an actual tuner, I always end up seeing that this built-in tuner ends up tuning the guitar about 3 or 4 cents sharp on every single string. That's not a huge deal, it isn't massive, but it does bother me, so I don't really use the built-in tuner very much on this guitar. Okay, what else do we have to go over? We already mentioned it's made in China. And it looks like that is it for the tech specs. Price on these guitars is about $400, street price, which is fairly affordable for an acoustic electric guitar like this. The definition of what is and isn't affordable or cheap is different for everybody. I know a lot of people who say that, $100, $150, that's a cheap guitar. And that would get you things like a Rogue or a Oscar Schmidt, and those are fairly decent guitars for the money. Very low price. Ignore the cat that you're going to hear making a fuss in the other room. Whereas the $300 to $500 range is a bit more crowded, and a lot of people call that, lower middle end or upper low end. This fits within that spectrum. How does it compare? I think it compares really, really well against a lot of those options. It really does have a very good sound, in my opinion, and the playability is pretty decent. Now, I haven't set this one up yet, even though I've owned it for a while, and maybe you'll be able to see that the action is a tad high for my liking. I will lower that down. Luckily, it'll be fairly easy to do because there's plenty of bridge saddle here to work with. And I'll also need to straighten the neck out with a truss rod, because as it sits, maybe you can hear that. I do have just the tiniest bit of buzz whenever I start moving up to the upper frets, and that can be fixed by just adjusting my truss rod. But I haven't done so yet because I wanted this to be as kind of as pure a review as I could, and I have so many other guitars that I take to gigs that I didn't bother setting this one up quite yet. I should have done so when I changed the strings, because I do have new strings on here. These are D'Addario Phosphor Bronze XS Lights, which are a great coated string that are, in my opinion, every bit as good as Elixir stuff, and I've been using them a lot here recently. But I just didn't for whatever reason, and next time I change the strings, I'll do my setup on it. But the playability isn't bad. It isn't uncomfortable to fret my notes even on the higher registries, but it could be more player friendly. And to be fair, that's kind of a thing not only with budget guitars, but even high-end guitars. I have seen so many Martins and Taylors and Gibsons that people get in the mail, and that they need set up. And that's just because they're going through so many different weather changes. You can't really ship a guitar with the truss rod cranked down. It's not good for the guitar. You need to loosen that off. So that ends up happening. Different weather conditions are going to warp your wood in different ways. So as a result, expect to have to set your guitar regardless of the price range. I don't really consider that a big downside. Have I got some guitars in the mail that were super playable right out of the box? Yeah. Is it common? No. And I've seen this issue predominantly, like especially, sorry Taylor fans, but I see it a lot on Taylor guitars. I have yet to find a Taylor guitar that a buddy of mine has bought online, or even that I've seen in store that had a good setup on it fresh from the factory. I know stuff that's going to piss off the Taylor fans out there. I don't hate Taylor, but I just call it like I see it. It's just an example of how even high-end guitars are going to need a little bit of love and attention whenever you first get them. So just take a little bit of time, tweak your truss rod, shade the saddle, you'll be good to go. It's really not that big of a deal. How does it sound? Well, you tell me. So you can kind of hear the tone. You can, if anyone out there has played a Gibson J-45, you know exactly what I mean by now when I say this sounds nothing like a Gibson J-45. It really does have a tone all its own. Let's do some plectrum picking or flat picking. Now some finger picking. Definitely feeling where it kind of needs to set up a little bit. There's just, you know, the tension on here is kind of weird, and the action is a little higher than I would prefer, so I am flubbing the notes a little bit. Not that I don't do that on well set up guitars anyways, because I'm by no means an amazing guitar player. Really hitting the guitar there so you can hear how it handles. And that is an advantage to having slightly higher action, is it can handle being hit really hard. And it holds up to that really, really well. So, acoustically, I think it sounds pretty damn nice. You know, everyone obviously has different opinions on what they like, but my mediocre playing aside, I feel like we get a pretty good tone out of this guitar, both for you know, your heavy strumming as well as your picking and your finger picking. If you're a lead acoustic player, I do think there's better options out there for you, simply because this doesn't have a cutaway, and this is a slope shoulder Dreadnought, which is nice to see at this price point, but we don't have a cutaway, so accessing these upper frets is a bit hard. What feels like a wider neck, even though it's not, for me, interrupts playability for a lot of lead stuff. Not that I'm amazing. I'm by no means a lead player in the first place, but there are definitely better necks for playing lead on an acoustic than this. Check out Ibanez or something like that. But for any rhythm player or picker, this is definitely a fantastic option. Now, if you're a gigging musician, this could be an excellent choice for you depending on the venue you're playing. And when I say that, it's basically just down to the electronics. The Undersaddle Piezo in here, like I said, is only average. So when you're playing a smaller venue like a bar, it's no big deal, because for one, everyone's drinking and it doesn't matter nearly as much. And for two, it's a smaller crowd, so you're not stretching that artificial sound across a wider range. But if you're playing a much larger area, the sound is going to be much more noticeable through those larger speakers spread out across a larger area. So I would recommend either upgrading the electronics in this if you do so, or just going for an acoustic that does have better electronics if you're playing much larger venues. You know, if you're much more successful than just your average bar band or garage band musician, there's probably better guitars out there for you than this. Not to say this is bad, by no means. The guitar is pretty damn good, but I have to be honest, the electronics just are not pro-level stuff, and they're not meant to be. This is not a guitar aimed at the pro level. AMI makes much nicer, much higher-end guitars that are aimed at that level. And in fact, I know several local musicians who play, you know, all the way from Oklahoma to Louisiana to all over Texas, from northern, southern, eastern, western, that use AMI guitars. And those work really well, but they're using the nicer AMIs. They're using like the Hummingbird and the J200 copy and things like that have Fishman electronics in them, which hold up better to that level of intense use in a larger setting than these, you know, cheaper kind of non-branded electronics are going to do. So another option you have is you could simply unplug the piezo from here, pull the piezo out, and get like a Journey Tech transducer system, install that, and plug that into the preamp, because it is compatible with any 10-pin jack preamp. So you could just, you know, rip the piezo out and put a transducer system in. That'll lower your action, so less setup on you out of the box, and it's going to undeniably give you a far better tone. That is an option you have access to if you want, and that would allow you to play this at, you know, higher end events. But I think you would be better off just getting a different guitar. And in fact, AMI/Sigma make a glossy finished, nicer version of this guitar that's closer to the Gibson J-45 that has Fishman electronics, for about double the price. It's in that $700 to $800 range. So if you're looking for that kind of guitar, you're better off going that way with it. This is more for the couch musician, the bar band musician, the garage band musician. As far as a recording guitar goes, mic it up. It's perfectly fine for recording artists. But do not plug it in for recording purposes. Not only do piezos just never sound good plugged in for recordings anyways, because they do sound so artificial, no matter, even the nicest ones end up sounding too artificial for a recording studio. But these especially just, again, they're not going to cut it. I'm not trying to bash these electronics, I'm really not. They're fine for the venues that I play, but I just know that they're not going to be suitable for those larger areas. And I want to stress that point so someone out there, you know, who plays those kind of venues doesn't buy this and end up hating it for that reason. So, you know, every guitar has a place. Just make sure you know where to use this. This is going to be competing against those $300 to $500 Fender acoustics, Epiphone acoustics, Ibanez acoustics, Alvarez acoustics, Washburn acoustics, things like that. And it stacks up really, really nicely against those, in my opinion. Also bringing to the table something you don't really see a lot of, being a slope shoulder Dreadnought in this price range. I really don't see that very often. I have written down the only other examples I can think of that have this, being the Guild DS240, the Epiphone AJ45 Studio, and the Applause AA569, or is it AAS69? I can't even read my own handwriting. Those are all budget slope shoulder Dreadnoughts that I would love to review in the future. Don't have access to them though. I have this. And personally, I am definitely a fan of it. So hopefully this review was informative and helpful to you. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and until next time, peace, and I will see you later.